The Turnbull government has promised to build 12 conventional submarines in South Australia at an enormous cost, $50 billion. Well, today, Tony Abbott suggested that could be a very expensive mistake. He said in a speech that as Prime Minister, he'd wanted our existing Collins-class submarines to go shadow a Russian naval task force that appeared to our north during the Brisbane meeting of G20 leaders, including Vladimir Putin, 3 years ago. Trouble is, our Navy couldn't get any submarines out there fast enough.
When a Russian naval task force appeared to our north at the time of the Brisbane G20, I was told that neither of our 2 deployed submarines could shadow it.
2 submarines, golly. Abbott now thinks we should consider whether we actually need nuclear submarines, not the conventional diesel ones we've ordered. In fact, he'd wished he'd put that idea much harder.
And not more robustly challenging. The nuclear no-go mindset is probably the biggest regret I have from my time as PM.
And Abbott raised other problems with those submarines that we're building in South Australia rather than overseas. Because they're built here, they'll cost a lot more. Because they're built here, we'll get them a lot later. The first won't be ready for 15 years or more. Joining me is the panel: Jeanette Cotterill, Managing Director of Executive Council Australia, and Bruce Hawker, former Labor campaign guru and head of the Campaigns and Communications Group. Jeanette, why are we so against nuclear?
Well, in a nutshell, to the Australian public, nuclear is scary. We don't know much about it. Successive governments, Labor and Liberal, have just never gone there. It is just too easy for Tony Abbott to say, hey, let's have a nuclear submarine and we'll scare the bejeevers out of the public, but hey, it'll be fabulous. And gee, I didn't think of it while I was Prime Minister. There's a whole bunch of other things behind that, though. Nuclear costs a lot more money, actually, to build in Australia. So you'd have to go offshore to Hawaii. There goes your jobs. There goes more costs. It is apparently going to put 10 years onto our current program. Well, not according to those in the defence machinery.
No, but that's the whole argument that he had, Bruce, about the order in South Australia. The Productivity Commission has estimated that's cost us at least a third more, or around a third more, just to build them here rather than overseas. That's the whole point.
Well, once upon a time, of course, we didn't really have to engage too heavily in the nuclear debate because we had plenty of cheap coal, and we still have got plenty of cheap coal, but now that debate's turning around. And, this is a little bit heretical of me, but maybe at some stage we actually do need to engage on that question. The thing, though, that does scare me, and I think Janet touched on it, is that when nuclear power goes bad, it goes catastrophically bad, as we've seen in places like Chernobyl. And we can't discount that prospect, Andrew. But in Europe and the United States and other places, you have very successful nuclear industries, but there's never a guarantee that we won't have a very significant problem. But as I said, that was not really something we had to worry about. There was always a plentiful supply of cheap energy in Australia that we could rely on without having to go to the major capital cost of going nuclear. At some stage in the future, that equation may not play out quite the way it has in the past. Unless, of course, you get to renewables in a way that still allows for base load power there to guarantee, the supply in the event that you have a significant problem with renewables.
Well, in fact, we've even had the Labor government of South Australia hold the Royal Commission to try and kickstart the nuclear industry in South Australia, because he's a global warming fanatic, and nuclear, of course, is very kind on emissions. But Jeanette, why are we spending $50 billion on submarines that may not be the best, will cost too much, and will be delayed too long, just so we can create jobs in South Australia and, wink, wink, save the seat of Christopher Pyne?
Well, you just answered your own question there, Andrew. There's probably a lot to do with it. I'm sure it's nothing to do about South Australian marginal seats. But, the submarine program has always been a bit of a blight on our economy. It doesn't matter what government's in place. And, it's been fraught with difficulty. The tender program was difficult. Tony Abbott, you recall, backed the Japanese. But he did start the conventional submarine program auction off in the first place. So It's a bit cute of him to start complaining now, but sure, it's all about jobs. I mean, you know, there's the demise of the car industry. You know, if it worked well, it's going to be the biggest shipbuilding program of its kind in this history of Australia. So it's pretty significant.
Yes, it sure is. Hey, listen, I'm sorry to interrupt you both. We'll come interrupt. I'm sure you're riveted. But listen, Jeanette, I want to pick you up on an interesting point you made. Tony Abbott is saying stuff that he didn't do as Prime Minister, and you're absolutely correct. And he's saying stuff, of course, that would be extremely hard to do as Prime Minister. But does that actually negate the point, you know, the value in having someone who does say stuff that does make sense, that is important, that we do need to consider, even if, in practice, it's going to be very hard to get through, say, a Senate?
All right, Andrew, I will put this question back to you. If Tony Abbott was sincere about putting good ideas on the table, getting the Liberal government re-elected, wouldn't he put one of those ideas back to the party room or even to the Prime Minister himself first? I mean, I don't think, and I think to be really honest, I was talking to a Cabinet Minister who is on the Conservative side tonight, who said, you know, if Tony had just stayed a little bit more conservative, like inwardly quiet and a bit more circumspect and a bit more respectful rather than revengeful, the Liberal Party right now might be going, why didn't we get that guy back again? But he's done himself an enormous amount of damage because he knows that every time he goes out there and slams the PM about submarines, and 12 hours ago he wanted the government to build its own coal-fired power station, and, you know, every day there is this rant from Tony Abbott about how bad Turnbull is travelling. If he had just kept quiet, he might actually be invited back to take over the reins. But right now he's done himself an enormous amount of damage.
But Bruce, let me float a radical idea with you. Maybe he figured that was never going to happen, and he may as well sit there and give us his unadulterated thoughts. This is how it should be. Let's talk about how things should be rather than, you know, this managerialism, what can we sneak through the Senate? I mean, if you don't start an argument, you'll never win one.
I think there is a case for elder statesmen to fulfil those sorts of roles. But I don't think that's really what Tony Abbott's on about, and I don't think most people think that that's what he's on about. Now, I've got no real problem with what he's on about, which is basically destabilising the Prime Minister, but he shouldn't try to dress it up as something other than that. You know, he's got ambitions either to be back in that job or to have somebody who fits his philosophical outlook to be back in that position as well, and for him to be back in the front bench. And I think he's going about it in a pretty systematic way. And look, and the fact that he goes to things where he's actually been the Prime Minister at the time when they, for example, they commissioned, you know, when they decided to issue those contracts for the non-nuclear powered submarines, goes to the, you know, the spurious nature of what he's doing. I mean, this really just goes to the dark twists inside the Liberal Party more than anything else. And, you know, I mean, I was part and parcel of some of these things inside the Labor Party, and everybody knows that it always ends in unhappiness.
But honestly, look, I can understand why you're saying that, Bruce, but Jeanette, I've got to add a little bit of personal knowledge here. I don't normally reveal private conversations, in fact, almost never, unless there's a very good reason I've got some licence to do so from the other person involved. But here I have to say that I've had debates privately with Tony Abbott for years about nuclear submarines versus conventional. I know that he believes that this was a mistake. I know that he thinks that we should have considered nuclear. It's not some Machiavellian strategy to kick Christopher Pyne while he's down, Christopher Pyne being the Defence Industry Minister in charge of this stupid program.
The fact that he achieves that on the way through, I'm sure, is of terrible outcome for Tony Abbott.
I'll grant you that much.
Andrew, I think he may well, you know, he may well go down in a screaming heap wanting nuclear. That's great. Tell the party room first. Why go in the media knowing full well that the media are going to focus on you yet again, Tony? It's not actually going to be about nuclear. It's going to be you doing this smashing, not even a stalking horse now. It's like a smashing down the front gates, just trying to, you know, make as much damage.
But what's wrong with giving notice and starting a debate? I don't understand why a guy like him has to shut up and act the mushroom and not start a debate. I mean, maybe the media's just got to grow up and stop treating every instance, every utterance as, oh, that's a challenge, rather than, hey, that's an interesting idea.
But
Andrew, who had the front page story this week of Christopher Pyne's leaked hubris speech? I think that was you. The media are totally involved in this.
If Christopher Pyne had said something serious and said something sensible and hadn't boasted about exactly what I've warned about, that it's got too far to the left, it wouldn't have made an impact. Bruce, the question here is, the man said something that is absolutely true, that a lot of people might agree with, but I think was absolutely wrong. I don't think the Liberal Party should be what it is. That's what gave that currency.
Sure, and in many ways goes to the heart of what the problem is right now. In a sense, it's not just it's not just Tony Abbott. It's really Malcolm Turnbull, you know, who is sitting uncomfortably with a large part of what you would regard as traditional Liberal supporters, and that's not working well for him at all. On the one hand, he's seen by progressives as being a conservative, and by conservatives as being a progressive in sheep's clothes. So wherever he goes now, he's got this problem of authenticity. You know, if there's one thing you can say about Abbott, for all his faults, and you know, and I'm not in any way a big supporter of his, he is authentic. You know, he sort of does believe in these things, and he says it.
That's the point I'm raising. When people say it's all Machiavellian, he does. I don't think you can look at any of these positions he's taking and say, Tony, you don't believe in it.
Exactly.
You might actually argue we didn't believe in it before, but fine, we all learn, we all grow. Listen, let's at least treat this for a debate. People are screaming for authenticity, screaming for new ideas. Here they're coming, and now they're saying, oh, well, you're a splitter. I mean, it's crazy. Hey, but listen, I've got to move on to another subject that really got my goat. I should note in passing that Christopher Pyne has apologised for his speech. Very sorry about it all. Whoops, he got caught. But Jeanette, this really got me for several reasons, but I'll just put the proposition to you and see what you think. St Justin's Catholic Primary School in Oran Park, southwest of Sydney. The teacher comes in. She says, children, this is a grade 4 class. She says, children, I got a letter from the Prime Minister. You're all going to be taken by officials. You're not being treated well at home. We're going to take you away from your parents. So the Year 4 class is going, what? 5 hours later, they're told, no, it was just the thing about the stolen generation, so you know what Aboriginal children went through. What do you make of this lesson?
Oh, look, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, Catholic schools right now are not travelling so well, but how ridiculous. I mean, I actually do a lot of work with the organisations behind the stolen generation, and there's a very strong, authentic story to tell about that, and the way that was portrayed is ridiculous. It was harmful to those children. It was a mockery of what is a very serious part of our history that we really do need to grapple, but not Year 4s do not need to grapple that yet. Adults need to grapple that. We need to understand the intergenerational trauma that the stolen generation has caused, but to do that to Year 4s, I mean, as a parent, I would be pulling my child out of that school pretty quick smart.
Bruce, can I put this proposition to you? You know my opinion on the stolen generations that I have found, and the courts as well. We can't, even the courts, in many court cases, cannot find even 10 children truly stolen just because they're Aboriginal. Isn't it the case that for that lesson, if we're going to go into let's imagine what it would be like, that the children should have been abused for years? They should have had social workers come and try to tell the teachers not to abuse them so much and then leave them to be abused again. They should have been beaten around, maybe not fed, maybe let to roam in the street, maybe not even come to school at all. And then they're told that they're going to be rescued. And then perhaps that would be a proper analogy with the stolen generations. True or false?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that at all, Andrew. I mean, you can't say that all Aboriginal children who were taken away as part of the stolen generation were taken away because they were being abused for years and years. They were taken away because they...
When you come up with exceptions, let me know.
Well, they were being taken away...
Most of the cases in the courts have failed for that reason.
But they were being taken away because they were part Aboriginal and part European. And, you know, for all the wrong reasons, the people that took them away thought that they were taking them away, that they were doing the right thing by them. And, you know, I've met people from the stolen generation generation, and some people have survived it okay, and others have come out of it very deeply scarred. But this thing that happened the other day was foolish. It did backfire. You don't need to traumatise children like that. That's what we're trying to avoid. All I'd say is that the children that was taken away from Aboriginal families didn't have 5 hours' notice. They just came and took them, and the trauma
Bruce,
and the impact.
Honestly,
and the impact that had.
You're reciting the myth.
Well,
it is irresponsible.
Well,
this
point
is
to
the
the facts,
irresponsibility.
Andrew. Point to the facts, Andrew.
I am talking about the facts. I, unlike you, have gone through every court case involving this. I, unlike you, have gone through the Stolen Generations test case in the Northern Territory.
Not everyone
evidence,
went to the. Not everyone went to court over this, Andrew.
I, like you, have checked almost every single major court claim, and I, unlike you, have had debates with Stolen Generations propagandists for years on this issue. And I can tell you that what you say
and as usual,
is
you're out of step with reality.
So damaging. No, I'm out of step with public opinion, correct?
Well,
but I'm not out of step with the facts.
Well,
and
Andrew,
this is damaging.
That just denies what's happened to individual
children are being left today in situations that you would save them if they were white, and that is the disgrace of this lesson.
Andrew, that's just a rant. That's just a rant.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I hate to side with Bruce, but having worked with the Healing Foundation, which was set up to look after the stolen generation, and there was the anniversary of the Bringing Home report, which had 60 stolen generation people involved in Parliament House, with the Prime Minister, with Bill Shorten, with a cross-party, I think it's really bad to say that there is no such thing as a true, authentic stolen generation person, and children from those people who... The intergenerational report that also shows there's intergenerational trauma to the next generation. I mean, you know, you can say in some cases the court cases didn't stack up, but in a lot of cases, Andrew, there is genuine stolen generation people out there who are still suffering.
Janet, all the court cases, bar one, which is an interesting exception I've written about, the Bruce Trevaro one. Every single court case has failed for the reasons I've given.
Andrew, you
and
lived in the Northern Territory. You came from the Northern Territory. You see how difficult it is, and how traumatised so many of those people are who have been dispossessed. They've been dispossessed and they're forced into those sorts of lifestyles.
Bruce, I've run out of time. I'm not trying to cut you off because you make a point. I agree with you. Being removed from your family for whatever reason is traumatic. That's absolutely true. Doesn't necessarily mean it's bad that you were removed. Thank you very much for joining me, Jeanette and Bruce Hawker.
Thank you.
Hang on, because up next...